The Equilibrium World's First Dungeon race just served up a predictably controversial affair with 3 huge and polarizing talking points, including massive leaks, World's First racers getting banned live, and the emergence of a problem that may be all but impossible for Bungie to fix. I've been able to speak to the people at the center of this drama to shed some further light on the situation. However, in order to break all of this down and understand the impact it'll have moving forward, we have to roll back to the very start. The Equilibrium Dungeon found itself launching at an intriguing time in Destiny. The Edge of Fate expansion had ultimately failed in its goals to reinvigorate the player base, with Bungie themselves also recognizing and accepting this fact. However, the launch and general positive reception of Renegades provided a small and needed win for both Bungie and the community. While Renegades is certainly no Forsaken, it is, more importantly, certainly no Curse of Osiris either, and the prospect of a Star Wars-inspired dungeon race provided further excitement for the player base to look forward to. Unfortunately, however, despite the optimistic outlook, the Equilibrium story started on a pretty terrible note. On the eve of its release, tweets and posts began to emerge surrounding possible early leaks of the dungeon. It's not unusual to hear rumors like this, and typically it amounts to nothing more than engagement farming, with even Call of Duty Zombies frequently having a similar narrative at the start of most of its new egg hunts too. At first, things seemed pretty vague and lacking context, but a few hours later, it became clear that this actually had significantly more evidence and substance than usual. There was an initial tweet posted 23 hours before the dungeon went live that said, quote, "The new dungeon isn't fully encrypted. You can see the map layout, enemies, cube maps, and more. I've scheduled a video after the race showing how much info teams can gather beforehand and how unfair that is." These map layouts and enemy leaks were not just random screenshots or early sneak peeks at the dungeon, and instead were far more revealing. Community members have been able to import game files into the 3D modeling software called Blender and map out basically the entire dungeon and explore every corner that they desired. The accuracy of these leaks were so strong that one user was even able to map out the exact pathing and directions to navigate through each traversal area, meaning that by the time racers reached that point, they'd basically have a guide written for them already. The community reaction to this was predictably fairly negative, as it seemed that the golden day in the Destiny calendar was being ruined before release. Many began to speculate that this would destroy the race, while others reminded the community that situations like this have happened and still resulted in great races before. Last Wish had players glitch into the playable space and even loot chests before launch, while Deepstone Crypt also suffered a similar fate and had the spoiler of a darkness statue within the dungeon revealed way beforehand. And that statue was quite a big deal, especially back in the Beyond Light era. However, I believe the cause of the more negative reaction in this scenario is the fact that all of this information was obtained with external software, which definitely feels a bit different than someone performing an in-game glitch with a sword. It would also transpire that this method had exposed more than simply just the environment, with Ducko responding to Saltagrepo saying, quote, "The devs left a lot of comments on the entities and models, and you know which models are mechanic related. It's awful." To credit Ducko, he seemed to remain pretty tight-lipped about his findings, reportedly not sharing information with any other teams or participating himself, but there's no guarantee others acted the same. Instead, he only made a secret prediction that would become scarily accurate down the line. As noon Eastern rolled around, the race kicked off, and with so many talented teams participating in this one, on Dungeon Zone, we found ourselves tracking as many squads as possible to see who would make the breakthrough first. The first thing that stood out to teams was the Enrage timer and the ability to use sparrows, with the entire encounter being mildly reminiscent of Vault of Glass's intro, but that's probably just because it's an open-air encounter on Venus, and there were certainly no Vex plates here. Some racers whizzed around on the vehicles, while others battled against walkers, and the new enemy named the Nameless Apprentice. However, before we could really process the mechanics, we suddenly had a report that this had been almost simultaneously completed by ATP and Llama D2. Llama is a British Destiny player and a creator who has played a significant role in recent World's First races, notably being the first to kill the challenging Hydra boss in Desert Perpetual named Apoptes, and he once again showed his prowess here, and his team was tied with ATP in the lead just under 20 minutes into the race.
And they cleared it.
New objective.
They cleared it. Wordle in 3
There it
is
is.
through, and we're getting word that ATP is also through. So let's bring ATP and Wordle in 3 right to you as soon as we can.
So right around 9:19, so 19 minutes in, that first little encounter completed from ATP and Llama as well.
This lead, however, was about to get as slender as it gets, as since we discussed, ATP's team cleared the first encounter almost simultaneously and actually progressed through the traversal area a little quicker. The leaks prior to launch certainly played a role in making the routing here easier, and just 25 minutes into the race, we got our first in-game look at Equilibrium's first boss.
Yep.
Whoa!
Oh! Double blades! Oh! Coming in lightsaber battle. Wait, and here we have Harrow, Dredgen Apprentice. So we are going to be fighting an apprentice. So we'll have to figure out first how to break that shield, second, maybe how to deflect the lightsabers.
The design of this boss was truly awesome, perfectly blending Destiny enemies with Star Wars weaponry, creating a Darth Galron kind of character. The initial mechanics were a pretty easy solve for ATP's team, as they reached their first damage phase just 9 minutes after reaching the encounter. The mechanics proved to be a development on what they'd experienced in the first encounter, requiring some buff collecting and button activation throughout a variety of rooms. The shield dropping mechanics were quite interesting here, as to lower Harrow's shield, racers essentially had to lure him into the environmental electric traps. The first real progress we saw was about 35 minutes into the race, when Saltagrepo completed a damage phase without dying, although this run would come to an end shortly after they began working towards phase 2. However, it would take until around the 50-minute mark in the race to feel like we were actually on completion watch for this first boss, when Llama showed that his team had once again been cooking and had reached a third phase of damage. As they blasted the boss down, they edged towards the final stand bar, and when they got there, something incredibly unexpected happened.
Here we go. What does it mean?
Whoa, whoa.
Wait, you broke it? Wait,
Follow
you chased him? Chase him!
Chase him!
Don't let him escape! Don't let him escape!
Where
He's
is
running
he going?
away. The final stand, he runs. Go play tag, catch him.
Where did he go?
It's a game of tag.
It has to be.
Can you-
Shields down, shields
Wait,
down.
okay.
Damage, damage, damage.
All right, more damage. Parasites out again. They swap, Mint's out, Wells
Looks like
down.
a final stand loadout is on.
Maybe it's like one where it's just like kind of a mobile, you kind of have to chase, kind of like Shuro-Chi.
Maybe.
Here we go.
I think Llama's actually kind of mad that he got
Enraged.
enraged.
And it wasn't enough.
It's a wipe.
It wasn't enough.
Make a ball into the hole.
Oh my gosh.
Ever since the infamous Riven Final Stand that ultimately cost Dado a world's first in Last Wish, Final Stand mechanics have been a bit hit or miss in Destiny, with some requiring players to simply just deal more damage and others spicing things up with something new added. Haro's Final Stand certainly falls into the latter category, and watching him blast through the wall and racers being forced to chase him to a new area was certainly a nice boost of adrenaline. Llama had very much played the guinea pig role here, first exposing this surprise to the community, and therefore, when ATP reached the same point just 6 minutes later, the outcome was predictably different.
I think it's gonna be close. I don't want to cap it. Maybe.
They got it. They got it. 59 minutes and 40 seconds in. ATP.
Just under an hour.
And on Pam, just under 1 hour, have beaten the second encounter.
ATP's kill of Haro had just come 20 seconds short of the 1 hour mark, and although we didn't know it at the time, the completion of this first encounter uncovered the true extent of the dungeon leaks beforehand, with the reality being that the early knowledge gained was much greater than many had first realized. Ducko had secretly written a prediction for the fight and its mechanics based on the leaks he had discovered before the launch that read, quote, "Looking at some cube maps reveals a model of a unique Cabal gladiator, which I do believe to be the boss of the encounter. Think Galron from Duality, as well as generators. Matador Destructible Generator, on the sides, and there seems to be nodes from Spire of the Watcher corresponding to each generator, and have either light or dark glows this time around that could also be taken. I would also like to point out that this encounter is called Matador, which could refer to bullfighters from Spain. My guess is that you have to bait the boss and make generators explode to break his immune shield. This might be a mega reach, but you never know. It is a close quarters fight, and the room seems really claustrophobic. The Matador comment and references to baiting the boss are really worrying to see, as it was essentially a complete leak of a key mechanic. And although Ducko couldn't be 100% sure these were the mechanics beforehand, the fact there was enough information in the first place to make that accurate of an educated guess is a real problem for Bungie and the Rad team. Although Ducko didn't post this prior to launch, as I mentioned before, if he was able to access this information, there is no guarantee that others didn't access and then share it with their favored racing team. In an ironic twist, however, these leaks seem to have little effect on the outcome of the race, as another situation became apparent and far more pressing later on. The speed of the first encounter completion legitimately led many to believe it was sort of an intro encounter, like the entrance of Alta Glass had. However, once people realized that Hara was a pushover for leading teams as well, there was understandably some negative reaction. But in a twist down the line, the referencing to any Equilibrium boss being a pushover couldn't really be more wrong. The traversal to the third encounter was truly beautiful as the ship warped through space. However, once again, it was clear that the leaks had clued up teams quite a bit here, as ATP's team plowed through the environment without any real hesitation. But before we even saw them reach the third encounter, we had actually gotten reports that a player named Jacquerie and his team had already reached it. And this is where things get really weird. Use code Evan at Cheeky and look good, smell good, feel good. And on top of that, use code Evan at GamerSupps for the best discount on the entire website. You see, Jacquerie had reached the Dredge and Seer encounter around 1 hour and 10 minutes into the race. And just 7 minutes after this, while they were trying to figure things out, something seemingly innocuous happened.
Jacquerie maybe jumped the gun on the ult a little bit. Somebody got disconnected as well. That's really unfortunate.
No. Yeah, you're right.
As you just heard in that clip, live on Dungeon Zone, we naturally assume that Jacquerie's teammate Uzi had just lagged out, with Bungie servers being somewhat infamous for error codes on launch days. However, a few minutes later, we would find out that this was no server mishap. Uzi posted the news of his ban on Twitter, and comments began to speculate on possible reasons for this ban, with many assuming this must have been to do with cheating. However, the truth is seemingly a little different. The team scout for Jacquerie, Barbux, and Uzi reached out to me following the race and shared some very interesting information.
Yeah, so they took a pretty decent lead after the first boss, which I think they killed within maybe 3 or 4 attempts. And then they flew through the transition and hit final, where, you know, I was lucky enough to figure out the mechanics relatively quickly, and I helped them get to a damage phase on the very, very first attempt, which was kind of cool. And then right after that attempt, Uzi got error coded, and when he tried to load back up, he was banned. And so our original thought was, hey, maybe Bungie suspected them of cheating, but you know, it's not uncommon that teams, you know, fly through some of the rad activities, so it probably wasn't that. And then later in the day, Uzi kind of told us that he had been banned on another account previously some years ago. He didn't really mention exactly why he was banned on that other account, but you know, now he was obviously ban evading, so that's probably why he got banned. And then we just kind of pieced together that when Bungie was validating the accounts that were in the lead, they saw that, you know, this is his second account and he has been banned before.
Jay continued on to say that Jacquerie and Barbux were both unaware about Uzi's ban evasion and were pretty devastated that their run was ruined while in the lead of a world's first race. After Bungie were somewhat embarrassed by the cheating drama in the contest Desert Perpetual, I can appreciate that it seems that their security teams are now taking a much more active approach in maintaining the integrity of the race, but it's hard to not feel for Jacquerie and Barbux, who were flying through the race here. Following the ban incident, attention turned to the reigning dungeon world's first winners of Biggs, Mario, and Luigi, as they were the first we saw to deal significant damage to the boss. The Dredge and Seer boss seemed pretty cool in both its design and attacks here, as it took the form of a giant darkness guardian, which added dark human tones. After years of fighting alien and robot monsters, teams quickly realized that this boss fight would take place over 2 similar rooms, identical in layout, but one being a taken or ascended version, requiring players to destroy shield orbs in each room to start a damage phase on the Dredgen boss, with these shields being depleted by performing an evolved version of the shadow mechanic that had existed since the start. We would later find out that this fight does have some further intricacies and mechanical details, but due to an issue we will discuss shortly, those intricacies weren't necessarily relevant to teams racing. Biggs, Mario, and Luigi had dealt damage to the boss on just their 4th attempt, and only 1 hour and 38 minutes into the race. While that fact is impressive in and of itself, the more staggering fact is that they found themselves on the final phase of the fight just 18 minutes later, and on only their 6th attempt of Dredge and Seer.
Will they repeat? Will they go back to back? Oh! Wait, what's happening? I don't know.
It's dead.
Wait.
That's it! That's it! Mission complete! End the timer! That's it! That's it!
Simply put, Team Tommy trivialized this dungeon boss and made history as not only the inaugural team to win back-to-back world's first dungeon races, but also the only team to just win 2 dungeon races in general. However, the big problem their win would expose in the present was arguably even more impactful than the history that they made. Biggs, Mario, and Luigi destroyed the dungeon in just under 2 hours, with the second place team coming in over 50 minutes later. That is the longest disparity between first and second place in dungeon history. However, a sub 3-hour dungeon is still a very quick contest mode, and after finishing Dungeon Zone, I was left with the opinion that Bungie had just made the dungeon easier this time around. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Much of the community was really struggling with this dungeon. Even very notable and good players were failing to complete it. Macdix, Frostbolt, and Benny, a team of talented creators, took over 13 hours to clear. 3-time world's first raider Swetsicle and his team took over 16 hours to clear, with Destiny's largest creator Aztecross also taking over 16 hours to complete his first run. Equilibrium was proving seriously tough for even very good Destiny players, whereas for a select few, it might have looked like a joke on contest mode, and this helped expose something that has been bubbling behind the scenes of the Destiny community for a while. The skill gap between a very good fire team and a top 10 fire team is simply larger than it has ever been. Some serious teams have invested time into practicing their strategies in underleveled or low-man content, and with Bungie's transition to more DPS check style encounters, the practice time has paid off in a massive way, while players who are not used to this find themselves frustrated by the pixel-perfect DPS rotation required. This was not just a case of Biggs, Mario, and Luigi using a secret broken build that they had found, and once they had completed it, everyone started copying and completions were flooding in. It was instead the result of them taking advantage and execute what they had practiced in the months leading up to Renegades. While Destiny rad bosses have always had enraged mechanics, often Bungie have offered the choice between a risky low phase strategy or a slightly more comfortable strategy that forces another round of mechanics. But this did not exist in Equilibrium or even Desert Perpetual before it, with teams once again forced to reach challenging damage gates or face wipes. The events of Equilibrium have ultimately left Bungie with an almost impossible problem to solve, as it has now become a nightmare to balance raid and dungeon content for all parties. World's first races have been heavily embraced by Bungie since Last Wish, and it's clear that viewers in the community clown upon and dislike short races. Therefore, it's natural for Bungie to implement features that require close to perfection, whether that be mechanically or from a damage perspective, as a way to lengthen the race. However, they must also balance their content for experienced players who just like to challenge themselves in contest modes, while also balancing content for normal mode play. And in dungeon content specifically, balancing things for solo and solo flawless play. Mechanic-based hunts have been frowned upon by some for creating a mad dash once one person gets lucky or cracks the puzzle, while DPS-based hunts seem to be a little alienating to those outside of the top 0.01% of the raiding community, and recent pieces of rad content have lacked a balance between both of these. What makes this even more challenging for Bungie to navigate is that there has been a shift in their DLC model, which means that there's only one raid and one dungeon per year, and there is less variety and room for error in raids and dungeons. While I'm no expert in rad development time, I think it's logical to assume that even if Bungie recognized the distaste by many players for DPS-centric fights after Desert Perpetual, it would be unlikely that there was any real time to change equilibrium for Renegades, as its damage checks were so deeply rooted in its identity and the contest difficulty. I'm also not advocating for either side. I'm not complaining, and I don't have any suggestions at this time, but it's clear that a balance needs to be found moving forward if Bungie wants to keep rad content and the races that come along with them as special as they have been for so long. On Steam alone, we saw a lower number of players checking out Equilibrium as compared to Desert Perpetual in relation to Edge of Fate, and that should be concerning for Bungie. But I'm interested to hear what you guys think of Equilibrium and all the things that came along with it. So please do leave me some thoughts down below, and thank you for watching.